and especially for Furdy and Paulson, what you find is a lot of what I think is empty rhetoric. To be blunt, I think it's just. I have a friend who calls it sloganeering Lutheranism, and I think that's an accurate statement, which is you tend to define your theology by slogans and by strong statements of, if you do this, you've killed God, or you've become a theologian of glory, or you've adopted the latter scheme, or you kind of have these phrases that you just throw out to dismiss actual fundamental, coherent, thoughtful argument, which I think is an unfortunate part of our society today. So which is part of why I think these guys tend to be pretty popular in our current age. They do well when it comes to tweeting. Sorry, I'm being a little blunt here, but I wouldn't say that about Bayer, by the way. I think that when my criticisms are the criticisms that I do give, I think it's important to say, yes, I've said that there's a radical Lutheranism as a group, in that there are common criticisms, there are common ways of speaking among these theologians, but I don't place them within the same category in every way, right? You have to treat them as individuals.
Right, but you do identify them all with existential philosophy, kind of underpinning everything, which I want to get to after this.
Yeah.
Because I think that this kind of is an outgrowth of that.
Yeah, so what you're saying in terms of Furdy, this idea that there is no fundamental, continuously existing I. So in his book, Justification, A Matter of Life and Death, Furdy essentially redefines, which he does with, every doctrine. In reality, every single doctrine is redefined by Furdy.
Yeah, which I would say is a real big problem for lay people reading his books who have not read all of them and have no concept of what is actually meant by phrases he employs.
Yeah, there is not one doctrine that does not undergo complete redefinition in Furdy's thought from classical historic Christian orthodoxy. This is not just scholasticism in the Lutheran scholastics of the 17th century. I'm talking about the theology of the ecumenical creeds of the church and just what is historic Christian thought. But what there is this kind of existential shift but just in thought in general. But this particularly has a lot of impact on Lutheran thinkers through someone like a Rudolf Bultmann, who is the most obvious example of Bultmann. He fundamentally says he's a student of Heidegger. Now, there are other influences on Bultmann other than Heidegger philosophically, but there's also debate as to whether Heidegger is actually an existentialist. He says he's not, but he shares some fundamental ideas with Sartre and others. Heidegger criticizes Sartre for being too individualistic, which is an apt criticism, but on some other fundamental points, they're in agreement. But what happens is there is this shift from understanding what things are in themselves, right, which is classical metaphysics, which is to say, you speak of a thing, you ask, what is the definition of a thing, right? Read Plato's Socratic dialogues, and if you look at the character of Socrates and in Plato's writings, he's going around asking, and he's kind of annoying. I can't imagine having Socrates as an actual figure in your town. He just goes up to random people in the shop and interrogates them about what they mean by justice or whatever. But I don't know how much of that is accurate to what happened in reality. But the questions of fundamentally, what is this thing? When you talk about justice, what do you mean? Right? When you talk about God, what is that? When you talk about humanity, what is that? How can we define what that thing is? But that's the thing in itself. And there's a shift philosophically with Kant, but we're speaking specifically of existentialism, which is really an outgrowth of a lot of movements that have happened prior to that. But in existentialism, the question is not what is this, but what is this in relation to me, right? So how does this impact me? And that shift is in Kant too. So it's prior to existentialism. But that's in a way that Heidegger often speaks, is a thing's impact on me, right? So what Heidegger says, and he uses the example I think I gave in there is like a pen, right? You look at a pen and you ask, the classical metaphysician may say, well, what is a pen? What are the elements that constitute a pen? If you ask Heidegger, what is a pen? He says, the thing that helps me write, right? So, you shift the conversation from what the thing is to what its use is.
Right.
And that's fundamentally what Furdy and Paulson end up doing, whether it's recognized or not. They're asking the questions of what is the use of that thing, or what is its impact on me, right? This is why Bayer says The only proper subject of theology is the sinful human and the justifying God. Because theology only defines us in real concrete situation in act, right? So in my concrete situation of sinner, and God in his concrete situation of justifying me, which denies all of this other stuff as being like an accurate or adequate thing to even talk about. So what you're doing is, and when I think people read this, what they think is, oh, well, you're just saying that, like, yeah, theology shouldn't be abstract and it should be practical and practically applied. And that's true, right? But that is what all of the scholastics do. I mean, if you look at Gerhard, every single doctrine concludes with an application. Like, why does this matter? And I think that is fundamentally where those who are coming from the more Protestant scholastic tradition do differ from the medievals. Is the medievals, I don't think, have that practical end in view all the time. It's not to say that they don't at all. But there definitely is a lot more room for things like speculation. But that's not all Ferde is getting at, right? So the place where you see this most obviously is, because everything is defined by its relation or its impact, right? And this is why we have the issue of the I. Because I am who I am in relation to God, and I am different because before and after justification or regeneration, because my relation with God has changed, so therefore I have changed to a different subject. Not just in the sense of I am a new creation, in that I am a fundamentally the same person, but I've been redeemed, I've been changed, right? Which is the classic way of looking at it. But I'm a fundamentally different I in every sense of the term, which negates the idea of redemption.
Right.
Because if I'm a different I, nothing is redeemed.
Right.
There is no redemption.